At the southern and eastern fringes of the Aegean Sea lie some of Greece's largest islands. These places seem remote today, but once they stood at the center of human innovation. Many of the values of Greek and Western civilization were first born and nurtured here. Crete, Samos, Chios, Rhodes, and the Dodecanese. Places of mesmerizing beauty and priceless heritage. Crete, the home of ancient palaces and the sinister legend of the Minotaur. Rhodes, the island once ruled by warrior monks born in the turmoil of the Crusades. And the Acropolis of Lindos, where Roger Moore ran a POW camp in a classic World War II movie. Observe the spellbinding decorations of a painted village and the restaurant where customers get plates broken on their heads. Discover a monastery where women who wish to conceive hope their prayers will be answered. The stunning classical site that gave birth to the most sacred oath in medicine. The tranquil island that could erupt any time into chaos and destruction. The vibrant performers who give life to the culture of ancient Crete. And the idyllic beach where Zorba the Greek danced. At the southeastern fringes of the Aegean Sea lie Greece's most far-flung islands, the Dodecanese. The name Dodecanese means 12 islands. In fact, this archipelago is made up of 15 large islands and as many as 150 small ones. Throughout history, the Dodecanese have been caught in the crossfire of war and invasion, from the Ottoman Turks to the Italians and Germans. This could be why they are perhaps the most diverse and cosmopolitan of all the Greek islands. Nowhere is this more apparent than in the largest of the Dodecanese. Some call it the Island of Roses. For others, it is the Island of the Sun. But many others know it as the one-time home of a gigantic statue, the Colossus. This is Rhodes. Mandrake, the harbor of Rhodes. The harbor is not only home to a superb marina, it's also a commercial hub with floating shops and a floating restaurant. But thousands of years ago, in the 3rd century BC, approaching seafarers beheld a more awe-inspiring sight. In Game of Thrones, the seaport of Braavos is guarded by the Titan of Braavos, a huge statue that stands with one foot planted on either side of the harbor. This dramatic idea is inspired by a real-life marvel that may have stood here at Mandrake Harbor over 2,000 years ago. A gigantic bronze statue of the sun god Helios, the Colossus of Rhodes. The Colossus of Rhodes was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The ancients built it out of gratitude to Helios, who they believed protected their city from capture. But the statue did not straddle the harbor. No one is certain where it stood, but it may have been here on the spot now occupied by the castle of St. Nicholas. At around 110 feet tall, the Colossus would have dwarfed the present-day castle. It took 12 years to build, but sadly stood for only 54. Around 228 BC, an earthquake destroyed it, and its huge broken pieces lay scattered for 1,000 years before being melted down as scrap. In recent years, a group of European architects put forward ambitious plans to rebuild the statue, this time to a height of 500 feet. The medieval city of Rhodes is one of the world's most important historical sites. Most of these buildings have stood here for over 600 years, continuously occupied. This powerful medieval wall that surrounds the old town runs for 2.5 miles. It's guarded by 11 gates. The most impressive is the Marine Gate. Constructed in 1478, it was the main entrance to the town from the harbor. And inside these walls, there stands an architectural marvel. This is the Palace of the Grand Masters, built by one of the most famous military orders in history, the Knights of St. John of Jerusalem. Founded during the Crusades, these Christian warrior monks had a presence in the Holy Land for almost 200 years. But when the Muslim forces finally drove the Crusaders out in 1291, the Knights looked to establish a new center of power. In 1309, they came to Rhodes. In the heart of the old city, they built this stunning palace to function as an administrative center and a residence for their Grand Masters. Now a museum, the palace boasts a magnificent courtyard. Standing sentinel here are statues of Roman emperors, recovered from the ruins of an ancient theater on the nearby island of Kos. The palace is built in the Gothic style, a rare example of this type of architecture in Greece. It served not only as a palace, but also a fortress. In 1481, these mighty battlements were almost leveled by an earthquake. But the most dramatic moment in the palace's history came some 40 years later, when a Turkish army laid siege to it. Only a few thousand knights faced a determined assault by 100,000 Turks. Despite a valiant effort, the knights could not withstand the siege. Forced to abandon the palace, they left Rhodes, never to return. Rhodes's history has had its fair share of dark episodes. None more so than during World War II, when the Italians, allies of Nazi Germany, were in control. Under Italian rule, the island's Jewish community was left relatively undisturbed. But when the Germans occupied Rhodes, everything changed. Below a green canopy, a small monument commemorates the horrific events of 1944, when the Nazis rounded up 1,800 Jewish men, women, and children. They dispatched these innocent civilians to a sinister destination, Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp. 1,604 Rhodian Jews died at Auschwitz. In their memory, this square is called the Square of the Jewish Martyrs. The Nazis set out to obliterate all traces of the Jewish presence on Rhodes, and almost succeeded. Today, very few Jews live on the island. But the Square of the Jewish Martyrs has also seen lighter moments. In 1979, Greek-American actor Telly Savalas, best known for his role as Kojak, filmed a scene here. Kojak is a tough, hard-bitten cop, but in the World War II film Escape to Athena, Savalas shows a more romantic side. He and leading lady Claudia Cardinale have a famous dance scene here in front of the square's seahorse fountain. The producers of Escape to Athena found their most dramatic location on Rhodes' southeast coast, the Acropolis of Lindos. In the film, Roger Moore of James Bond fame plays an Austrian general who is obsessed with Greek antiquities. The Acropolis of Lindos doubles as the fictional Mount Athena, where Moore runs a POW camp. The prisoners are forced to excavate ruins in return for more favorable treatment. The events of the film are fictional, but in real life, the Nazis were all too adept at looting priceless artifacts from archaeological sites. The Acropolis of Lindos has been an important place for thousands of years. The ancient Greeks and Romans recognized the strategic significance of this location, which guards an important sea lane between Europe and the Middle East. From the calm waters of the Mediterranean, rugged cliffs ascend 300 feet to the Acropolis. Here, the ancients constructed a great temple to the goddess Athena Lindia. Many centuries later, the Knights of St. John took over the Acropolis and built these magnificent walls. Escape to Athena isn't the only film shot on this stunning pinnacle. In 1961, Gregory Peck and Anthony Quinn came here to film another World War II blockbuster, The Guns of Navarone. In the film, Peck and Quinn play Allied soldiers who disguise themselves as Greek fishermen and sail across the Aegean to fight the Nazis. Unsurprisingly, the cast of Navarone were entranced by their surroundings. So much so that one of them wanted to forge a permanent link with Rhodes. Further north along the coast lies one of the island's most picturesque inlets. This is Anthony Quinn Bay, named for the actor. In Navarone, Quinn played a Greek commando, and a few years later he had an even more famous role as Zorba the Greek in the film of the same name. Ironically, though, Quinn himself had no Greek blood. He was actually Mexican-American. Quinn discovered this bay and its beach while filming The Guns of Navarone. He fell in love with the place and decided to buy it. The authorities agreed that the actor could have it for a symbolic sum in return for his role in publicizing Rhodes. But they reneged on the promise, and the purchase was annulled. Quinn vowed never to visit Rhodes again. More than 50 years later, the dispute remains unresolved, with Quinn's widow, Catherine, still seeking compensation from the Greek authorities. This sprawling hill on Rhodes' east coast has a unique purpose. Two women and a child climb toward the summit. They're on a pilgrimage to the monastery of Tsambica, a Byzantine church dedicated to the Virgin Mary. But this is no ordinary pilgrimage. It's said that if a woman climbs the 292 steps to the monastery and prays to the icon of the Virgin Mary, she will be granted a child within a year. The monastery is a magnet for childless women who come to revere the 11th century icon, particularly on September 8th, the day of Tsambica's festival. The belief could have its origins in the legend of Artemis, the ancient Greek goddess of fertility and midwives. Some believe that an altar to the goddess stood on this dizzying peak. Many women have had their prayers answered, and as a thank you, some name their children Tsambikos or Tsambica after the monastery. Northwest of Rhodes lies one of the jewels of the Dodecanese. Basking in the Aegean sun, Symi Island and its harbor Yalos have long been a magnet for jet-setters and celebrities. Maybe it's the colorful neoclassical facades that line the harbor. Or perhaps it's the entrancing maze of laneways in the upper town of Horiot. Whatever the reason, famous stars and politicians, from Mariah Carey and Michael Douglas to George Bush Sr. and Silvio Berlusconi, have made multiple visits to Symi. At a fish restaurant on the seafront, the clients witness a bizarre spectacle. Owner Manos Magos smashes plates first on the ground and then on their heads. Princess Beatrice of the British royal family famously received this treatment when she visited the restaurant. This custom, known as the killing of plates, is an age-old tradition on Symi. Its purpose was to drive away evil spirits, but these days it's done more for fun and entertainment. It might just be the most enjoyable thing to do in Symi. Further down the waterfront is another restaurant with a colorful history. Restaurant LOS Art Yacht Club, with its striking red facade, hosted one of the most famous peace accords in Greek history. On May 8, 1945, the Nazis finally surrendered to the Allies here, marking the end of World War II in Greece. The Asclepion on the island of Kos is one of the most momentous classical sites in all of Greece. It's named for Asclepius, the Greek god of healing and medicine, who was banished to Earth by his father Apollo. Asclepius is said to have learned the art of healing from a centaur. The legend inspired the ancient Greeks to build institutions dedicated to medicine, the world's first hospitals. History's most renowned physician trained here. His name was Hippocrates, and today he's best known for the Hippocratic Oath. The oath arose from a code of medical ethics devised by Hippocrates. Those who took it pledged to do no harm to their patients and treat them to the best of their ability. Many modern medical schools still use the oath, or parts of it, in their graduation ceremonies. The Asclepion was a center of healing until the 4th century AD, when 2 successive earthquakes forced out its residents. But to this day, it is renowned for its scientific approach to medical diagnosis and treatment. Just south of Kos, on the island of Nisiros, it seems possible to step right into a story from Greek myth and legend. Beneath the surface of this rocky islet, a powerful being known as a Titan can be heard groaning. He has been known to erupt with devastating power. According to mythology, this place was the scene of an epic battle between the Titan and the sea god Poseidon. This small church overlooks a magnificent valley. Here, Poseidon crushed the Titan with a gigantic rock. Or so it seemed to the ancients, because Nisiros is home to the Stephanos crater, a dormant volcano that last erupted in 1933. Oval in shape, Stephanos measures 853 feet across and 88 feet deep. It's one of the largest and best preserved hydrothermal craters in the world. Surprisingly, people are free to walk on the crater if they wish. They are only advised not to approach the holes, where the surface is known to give way suddenly. North of the Dodecanese, the islands of Samos and Chios guard the approaches to Turkey's western coast. They share a common history since ancient times, when they were the stepping stones of trade, shipping, and communication between Asia and Europe. Since they were first settled around 5000 BC, the islands have passed through the hands of every major Mediterranean civilization, from the Greeks to the Egyptians to the Romans in the 1st century BC. In the Middle Ages, control passed to the Ottoman Empire, which held sway until 1912, when the islands were finally incorporated into the Greek state. Tucked inside a sheltered bay, Samos port has given birth to ships for over 2,000 years. In 250 BC, the entire Egyptian navy was based here. And for good reason. Samian shipbuilders were famous for their boat-building skills, especially the tough wooden hulls made from local wood. For centuries, Samian pine was prized by every shipyard in Greece for its sturdiness and high resin content. By the 20th century, however, the demand for wooden hulls had diminished. The Bay of Agios Isidoros is home to the island's last surviving shipyard. Here, two craftsmen use Samian pine to create sturdy fishing boats known as trekantiria. Vavelis Manoliadis, seen here planing wood, works alongside his friend, Kyriakos. They're the only local shipbuilders who still use traditional methods. 50 years ago, there were 100 shipbuilders working here, but now there is only Vavelis and Kyriakos. Depending on size, the two men can build an average of 5 boats a year. But these vessels have to be durable. They're intended for local fishermen who will spend a lot of time on the open seas. In the past, pirates also roamed these seas. Northwest of Samos, they targeted another lonely island. The Greek island of Chios is home to a village like no other. Pyrgi is famed for the curious black and white geometric motifs called cista that adorn its facades. So much so that it's called the Painted Village. This decorative technique, much like the Italian graffiti, is produced by applying layers of plaster tinted in contrasting colors to a moistened surface. Pyrgi still retains its original 10th century medieval structure, with narrow streets, vaults, and arches. It may be the most well-maintained village on Chios. Another of Chios's towns could not be more different. The Byzantine tower village of Anavatos hugs a granite peak at the island's center. Now deserted, its crumbling dwellings rise up to a medieval stronghold at the summit. In the past, this was a military position, most likely set up to defend against the pirates that plagued the island's coasts. The pirates attacked Anavatos regularly in the 18th and 19th centuries. Then, after a catastrophic earthquake in 1881, the village was finally abandoned. Today, it is well preserved and eerily quiet, the very epitome of a ghost town. Marking the southern boundary of the Aegean Sea is the largest of all the Greek islands. Crete is 160 miles long and 37 miles wide at its broadest. So it's no wonder that its inhabitants call it Megalonisos, the Great Island. But they're not just talking about its size. They're also talking about its status, because this is where it all began. If Greece is the cradle of European civilization, then Crete is the cradle of Greece. Long before classical Greek civilization arose on the mainland, a sophisticated society flourished on this spectacular island. the Minoans. The Minoans ruled Crete from around 3000 to 1100 BC. They left behind stunning physical remains and magnificent palaces. The greatest of all is the Palace of Knossos, which flourished for over 1,000 years. As a major center of trade, it had links with many ports and cities in the eastern Mediterranean. In its day, Knossos was a marvel, boasting spectacular royal buildings, extensive workshops, and luxurious rock-cut tombs. But in time, the Minoans were superseded by the Mycenaean culture that arose on mainland Greece. Around 1400 BC, a mysterious fire destroyed much of Knossos. The town that survived was a shadow of its former glory. Knossos again came to prominence in the early 20th century when British archaeologist Arthur Evans excavated and restored it. Today, the site covers about 150,000 square feet. Knossos is a mystifying place. We'll never fully understand the Minoan culture that built this great complex. But what really captures the imagination here is the legend of a fearsome creature, half man and half bull, the Minotaur. The ruler of Knossos, King Minos, imprisoned the creature in a dark labyrinth, a maze of twisting passages. The Minotaur lurked in the shadows, devouring anyone unlucky enough to be thrown into the labyrinth, until at last, the hero Theseus killed him. The origins of the legend may lie in seismic activity. Knossos lies at the center of an earthquake zone. Some believed that the rumbling of the earth was the sound of the Minotaur roaring. Arthur Evans believed that the legend originated in the Minoan sport of bull jumping, shown in frescoes on the palace walls. By grabbing the bull's horns and leaping back over the animal, man and bull appeared to be one creature. But did the labyrinth exist? The question has mystified visitors to Knossos for many years. Some believe the palace itself was the labyrinth, and it does have a maze-like appearance, with many confusing passageways and dead ends. The Minoan civilization may have died out thousands of years ago, but its spirit is very much alive among Cretans today. The Minoan theater is a group of young dancers who recreate the ancient Minoans' flamboyant performances, including the bull dance. Like their ancient ancestors, the dancers leap energetically over a bull. Not a live one, thankfully. Evagalia Orphanoudaki is a traditional Greek dancer. She has been performing with the Minoan theater since 2011. She practices every day to perfect the intricate dance moves and techniques. Evagalia and her fellow dancers enjoy keeping this important tradition alive. But the women are not just dancers. They also see themselves as priestesses inspired by nature. By dancing, they pray to the Mother Goddess, represented by an ancient olive tree that faces the theater. It's no surprise that nature is important to the Cretan people, given their magnificent surroundings. In the southwest of Crete stands a majestic limestone mountain range. This is Lefka Ori, the White Mountains, known for its spectacular plateaus and gorges that run like tunnels through the rock. The most impressive is Samaria Gorge. From the coastal village of Agia Rumeli, the gorge climbs steadily into the mountains. Covering 10 miles, it's one of Europe's longest canyons. At its highest point, the gorge will reach 1,250 feet. The steep rock faces and raw beauty make Samaria Gorge one of Crete's most popular hiking destinations. It also boasts impressive expanses of high-altitude Mediterranean forest. Pine, cypress, and frigana trees all thrive here. In the past, this was a rich source of timber, but these days, the gorge enjoys special protection as a UNESCO World Biosphere Reserve. And yet there is danger amid the beauty. Some steep sections are prone to rockfalls. Not far away, another canyon cuts through the mountains. With its dusty yellow appearance, it seems to belong more to the American West than the southern Mediterranean. This is Aradina Gorge, famed for its steep walls that ascend vertically for 500 feet. It's also home to a small community. This pickup truck is heading for the area's only inhabited village. Beyond the gorge, Agios Yanis village is separated from the rest of Crete. But it does have one important lifeline. The Aradina Bridge crosses the narrow gorge at an altitude of 453 feet. This is a Bailey bridge, a type of prefabricated bridge that can be transported easily and assembled by hand. British engineers first developed these structures for military use during World War II. Today, the Aradina Bridge is the highest of its kind in the world. Constructed using a steel structure and wooden planks, it is 275 feet long. The bridge owes its existence to two local businessmen, the Vardinovianis brothers. They commissioned it to give their community a link to the outside world. Without the bridge, Agios Yanis would have been abandoned. Now, locals like Manolis Orphanodakis can reach the village easily. But when a vehicle crosses the bridge, the serene atmosphere is shattered. The sound of tires on the wooden planks creates a thundering echo that can be heard throughout the canyon. It's also not safe to be under the bridge because passing vehicles often dislodge debris and send it crashing into the depths. At Matala, on Crete's southern coast, lies a beach and a cliff with a unique story. Honeycombed with dozens of small caves, the rock face looks like a giant beehive. The island's early Stone Age inhabitants cut the caves out of the cliff face thousands of years ago. Some believe they used them as tombs, but it's just as likely they were living spaces. In more recent times, the caves of Matala became an iconic hippie destination. In the 1960s, the arrival of long-haired, guitar-strumming Americans completely shook up the sleepy fishing village of Matala. Famously, Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, and Cat Stevens are all said to have been attracted to this bohemian haven. But singer Joni Mitchell has the closest connection with Matala. In 1970, Mitchell came to live in the caves following her painful breakup from fellow songsmith Graham Nash. At the time, Matala Village had only 2 restaurants and a bakery, and Joni adored the wholesome local cuisine. By the end of a 4-month stay, she had grown homesick but the experience inspired some of the songs on her acclaimed album, Blue. Joni Mitchell may have found peace and love on Crete, but the island has also known war and turmoil. The city of Chania on Crete's north coast looks peaceful today. But 80 years ago, at the height of World War II, it was overrun with armed soldiers. The Germans invaded Greece in April 1941 and quickly overran the mainland. After a few weeks, only Crete still held out against the might of Nazi Germany. With the British Navy in control of the seas, the Germans were unwilling to risk an amphibious assault. Instead, Hitler decided on a new and daring tactic. On May 20th, 1941, dozens of German planes appeared in the sky over Chania. They were not bombers, but transport aircraft, carrying a human cargo. When the planes jettisoned their loads, swarms of paratroopers darkened the sky. Some 10,000 German paratroopers descended on Crete. For the first time in history, an invading force had arrived mainly by air. The Germans faced a combined Allied and Greek army. Although the force was 40,000 strong, it was short on weapons and heavy artillery. Even so, the Allies inflicted heavy losses on the German paratroopers. But then the Germans took control, forcing the Allies into a slow retreat toward the island's south coast. Many of those who fell in the conflict are buried here in the Allied War Cemetery at Suda Bay. The British lost almost 4,000 men in the Battle of Crete, with 11,000 more captured. This cemetery is a grim reminder of the terrible toll the war took on human life, not only in Crete, but around the world. Further along the island's coast is a colorful spot. The sand of Elafonisi Beach has a remarkable pinkish hue. But it's not the sand itself that is pink. In fact, the color is produced by thousands of broken seashells. The shells belong to a type of oyster named foraminifera. When they're crushed, their red color mingles with the sand, giving it a pink hue. This, combined with the clear green-blue waters, gives the impression of an exotic paradise. And it's no surprise that Elafonisi is consistently voted one of the world's most majestic beaches. Due north of Elafonisi, near Crete's northwestern tip, lies another special beach. The lagoon of Balos is possibly the most photographed body of water in all of Crete. A pale sandy beach surrounds the turquoise lagoon, which attracts holidaymakers from all over. The lagoon and its surroundings are a haven for rare flora and fauna. To protect it, the government has banned the high-rise hotels and commercial buildings that often blight beauty spots. Two of the lagoon's most famous visitors were Prince Charles and Princess Diana. In 1981, the royal couple honeymooned on the Mediterranean. Their yacht, the Britannia, dropped anchor here at Balos. These days, a cruise ship, the Grambusa, makes regular trips to the lagoon. Tourists disembark and swarm onto the beach, looking rather like invading soldiers. It could almost be a D-Day landing scene from Saving Private Ryan. if it wasn't for the pristine weather and tranquil surroundings. When it comes to ideas for Hollywood movies, Crete is not lacking. A native son inspired two very famous and very different films. Perched on a hill outside Crete's capital city, Heraklion, is the tomb of the man who wrote The Last Temptation of Christ. Nikos Kazantzakis remains one of Greece's most famous writers. So why is he buried in this lonely place, marked only by a simple cross and stone slab? Kazantzakis was born in Heraklion in 1883. He traveled widely abroad, returning to Greece just before World War II. In 1955, he published The Last Temptation of Christ, which depicts a Jesus with all too human frailties: fear, doubts, depression, and lust. The novel caused major controversy, and the Greek Orthodox Church excommunicated Kazantzakis. He was not permitted to be buried in a cemetery. So in his will, he asked to be buried outside the walls of his hometown. In 1988, the controversy flared again when Martin Scorsese directed a film based on the novel. By then, Kazantzakis was long dead. The famous epitaph on his tomb reads, "I hope for nothing, I fear nothing, I am free." These sentiments have an eloquent basis in Kazantzakis' other great novel, Zorba the Greek. First published in 1946, Zorba the Greek was made into a film starring Anthony Quinn and Alan Bates. The film's most iconic scene was shot here, on Stavros Beach. Here, the Viglatores dance group performs a Greek folk dance called the Sirtaki, made famous by the film. Zorba the Greek was a box office smash hit and scooped 3 Academy Awards. To outsiders, the film seems to epitomize Greece, but it does take certain liberties. The film tells the tale of Basil, a reserved English writer who travels to Crete on business. While there, Basil meets the extrovert Greek Alexis Zorba, and his life changes forever. In the film's closing scene, Basil and Zorba perform the Sirtaki on Stavros Beach. Sirtaki can be danced in line or circle formation, with hands on neighbors' shoulders. But the dance has a secret. It's pure Hollywood. Choreographer Giorgos Provias created it for the film. Set to music by famous Greek composer Mikis Theodorakis, Zorba's dance became a worldwide hit. As the film closes, Basil has learned to break out of his shell and embrace life. Like Nikos Kazantzakis himself, he has learned to hope for nothing, to fear nothing, and to be free. A sentiment that appeals to many who visit Crete and the enchanting islands of Greece.